Hello, good morning. So, visual description from me. I'll just move over so I'm slightly in the camera line. I am a white woman, can't tell you my height, but I have shoulder length dark hair and I'm wearing a zebra print dress and I wear glasses on and off as when I need to see the screen. So today I'm going to be talking about where we go next with working with schools. So I'm going to give you a little overview of some of the things we know about schools as an audience. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing at National Trust for Scotland, and then I'm going to finish up with some questions as I go through about where we go next as a sector with this. So, just before we go any further, actually, just a show of hands in the room. How many of you currently either work with schools or want to work with schools in your current role? Really interesting to see. And for those watching online, I would say that's maybe about a third of people in the room. So my name's Sarah Cowie, I'm Senior Heritage Learning Advisor, my pronouns are she, her, and I work alongside my colleague Sarah Connaught, who's our Participation Officer, who is watching online today. Hello Sarah. And we are based centrally in the Trust and we work with wonderful property colleagues out and about across the country. Both of our roles are really new for the Trust. Both roles were created and we started in 2022. So it's a really different way forward for the Trust. We are just about to, you might have seen, we're just recruiting a new role of formal learning advisor to come and join us as well. So in case you're not aware of National Trust, we care for properties right across the country, from beaches to mountains, castles to palaces and everything in between. Quick show of hands again. Anyone think they've been to National Trust for Scotland place at some point? Okay, quite again for people watching online, that's quite a lot of people, which is lovely because there are places right across Scotland. So we have a 10-year strategy, which is Nature, Beauty and Heritage for Everyone, which again came in 2022 and marked a new way forward for the Trust. And we have 3 pillars within that, and engagement is one of them, which is super to see our work with schools back up there again in the priority for the Trust. So what we do with schools really varies across the country. So this is Bannockburn. Bannockburn is one of our most visited places by schools, along with Culloden, Culzean Country Park down in Ayrshire, and Robert Burns Birthplace Museum, which is where this pupil is being threatened with a whisk. I'd promise to do more than that. Look at Scots language as well. But I guess the variety of things we do, led by our wonderful property colleagues, include workshops and talks and outdoor conservation. So our rangers take pupils out and get them involved in looking after the local landscapes. But I guess what we've been doing a lot over the last few years, Sarah and I, is looking at what are we doing at the moment, where do our property colleagues need support, and how can we go forward from here? So I thought it'd be useful to share some of that research with you. And I guess this is an image from one of our ranger sessions, the day in the life of a tree, which I am desperate to go on. But I guess for me, the tree represents what I think schools really should be in our sector. If we get school pupils into our places and into our sector places, we can really embed them and embed a life of visiting museums, heritage from the start, and in turn, hopefully, they will become our future members, visitors, workforce. So I'm really passionate about working with schools as an audience, and I think they're one of the most democratic ways we can work with our communities. And I hope you feel some of the same things. And I'm really pleased to see that, for us, schools have certainly gone up in importance, and Museums Galleries Scotland as well have put education as a key part of their strategy. And I think schools as an audience, sometimes in our sector over the last few years, maybe the importance of them as an audience wasn't quite held up there, and I think it's time to change that. So some of the things that we know about pupils across Scotland, I think are really interesting, not only for our work with schools, but our more general work as well. So the Scottish Government publish statistics every year that everyone can access, and schools are one of our audiences in the sector that we can get every amount of data about. It's publicly available, and if you've not looked at that for your local schools, I would absolutely recommend it. So some of the things we know about pupils across Scotland from this last year's statistics is that 36% of pupils have a recorded additional support need. So that's gone up. It was 34% last year. So we need to think about that for schools visiting us, but we need to remember that these pupils come to us in family groups, maybe in uniformed groups in other ways, and these pupils will also become our future workforce. So we need to start thinking about, are we really open, inclusive, accessible to this range of pupils? And this is the 36%, I should say, is across mainstream and special schools. Another key statistic is that 8% of pupils across Scotland have English as an additional language. So that is pupils who are new to English or who are developing a competency in it. So this really varies across the country. We recently worked with schools in Glasgow where this percentage was really high in 60s, 70s%, and it really varies. But again, this isn't pupils in isolation. We need to think about this, about these pupils hopefully will come and visit us with their families. So are we doing enough to support them? And then the last statistic is that 40% of pupils in Scotland live in the 2 highest quintiles of social deprivation. So that means the most deprived areas. So it is really split across the different quintiles, but I guess the other thing we know is that the number of pupils and young people living in poverty in Scotland is increasing, and that the attainment gap is widening between those in poverty and those not. If you've not come across the cost of school day research or the work some museums have done around poverty proofing, it's really interesting. Have a look at that, because there are really simple ways that we can make our places more accessible. And for me, working with schools and reaching out to schools, we can reach some of these pupils who might not otherwise engage with us. Now, the 2 groups that aren't included in these statistics behind me are home educated pupils, and the Scottish Home Education Forum say that there are unreliable statistics, but we know the number of pupils being educated at home is growing since the pandemic, and independent schools. So about 5% of the Scottish schools population are educated privately, and a lot of them are in Central Belt and northeast of the country. So again, something to bear in mind. So are schools coming back to us in terms of coming on day trips again and coming on visits? So this is some research by TeacherTap, who do work with teachers across the UK. So this is, teachers were asked, will your class do the following this year? So the top one is going on a day trip within walking distance. The middle one is day trip travel, so public transport, bus, coach. And the bottom one is going on a residential trip. So the blue lines at the bottom of each one is the pre-pandemic number. And then it works back through red is 22, green is 23, and purple is 24. So you can see that for day trip walking and day trip travel, the numbers are slowly increasing. So we're nearly back, particularly for going on a day trip where you travel to. Teachers are saying they're almost back at pre-pandemic levels, but not quite. And residential trip, we've not quite increased on that yet. So if you engage with pupils in any of these ways, it's just worth thinking about those statistics. And at the Trust, we are seeing our numbers slowly increase again. So this is our numbers from 2016 to 2023. The green line is where the pandemic hit. So no surprise, the numbers went right down. The blue line is our primary visitors, and red is secondary. So you'll see that primary have come back in higher numbers quicker, but we're not quite back at pre-pandemic levels yet. And it'd be interesting to hear from you if you're kind of in a similar situation. And one thing I guess we need to think about with some of these statistics is we're now at the point where some teachers will never have been on a school trip with their class, or maybe have only been on 1 or 2 school trips. So one of the big things to think about is barriers. So we know transport is a big issue for schools, but also teacher confidence in bringing their class out and the amount of time it takes. So the Art Fund did some research recently, and for a trip somewhere half an hour away, it took a teacher 6 hours of planning time. So anything we can do to cut down on that, they will very much welcome. So we also did some more in-depth research with teachers at the 3 places I've mentioned before, so Culloden, Robert Burns Birthplace Museum and Bannockburn. And teachers told us they wanted specific things. So this is Caitlin delivering a session at Culloden. And one of the things teachers were really clear on was that they needed links to the curriculum. Now, we might think that is, of course, really straightforward, but we need to think more about how we communicate that so teachers can use that to emphasise to their senior management about why they're going to come out on a trip. We worked with Culloden to develop a new What's On for Schools. I have some copies here, if anybody would like a hard copy, and they're also available online. And in that, we really thought about how we could really communicate the curricular links to a school visit. The second thing, I love this photo of a child working out how to use an old-fashioned phone. So the other thing teachers said was that they sometimes struggle to work out how to communicate with places. So quite a lot of the time teachers will use Google to find out where to go on a school trip. So we've been thinking a lot and working with our digital team on how do we make that clearer, how do we make things come up in Google searches, but also how do we make sure there's a really easy communication route and booking process. And the teams at Culloden, Bannockburn and Robert Burns Birthplace Museum are already on it with this. Teachers also wanted to share their learning objectives. So we've updated our booking form that we use, because often while teachers will want to tick off a curriculum link, it's really about that full child development. So sometimes they might be coming on a school trip, but they also want to use that to encourage people to think about local careers, how to travel safely. So we wanted to make sure we were capturing that. They also wanted, as you can see here, an experience they wouldn't get in the classroom. This is Kirsty leading a session at Bannockburn. And they wanted it led by staff. So again, this comes back to that thing about teachers maybe needing a bit more support than they did in the past. Teachers seem much more keen now to come on staff or volunteer-led activities than self-led, and they really valued the input of staff and volunteers. That really came through in their quotes. And the last thing, which was I guess surprising in one way, was that teachers also wanted to develop their own professional knowledge and practice. So not only do they want to come on a visit, but they want to get involved while they're there and learn something themselves. The other thing they want to do is other ways they can engage with us as an organisation. So if you do adult learning opportunities or talks or any other way that adults can learn, it's worthwhile thinking about teachers as an audience for that, because teachers were really keen, particularly to think about how they can take that into the classroom. And the last thing on that was that I guess, one thing that has been really key for teachers and for our sector is that we have all felt really under pressure, overworked, overstretched over the last few years coming back from COVID. And one thing that came out from teachers was, they feel a lot of this pressure, so how can we help them to take care of themselves, and making sure that we take care of ourselves as well, looking at Tamsin in the audience. And we've been using the 5 ways to wellbeing as a way of thinking about how we can reflect on our own wellbeing in our team, but also support teachers. We're just trialling a mindfulness resource that Sarah Connett, who's watching online, has been working on. And again, that's to, I guess, think about a different way that teachers can use our spaces, indoor or outdoor. And then finally, one of the really interesting and kind of positive things that came out, that after a visit with their school, teachers said 99% of them were likely to return, and 91% of them said it encouraged them to visit other trust properties. And one thing I'm interested in there is that I think the 91% isn't just about visiting other trust properties. I think it's about one thing we need to think about as a sector is about how do we support each other and make sure we're pointing teachers and other education professionals to each other as a sector rather than as individual organisations, because we are really difficult to tell apart if you're a teacher, aren't we? So where we're going to go next. So we are going to do further research with teachers. One of the things we want to dig into is what is the kind of secondary impact of a pupil coming on a visit. So what are those other things that happen around that? We want to ask teachers more about some things about how do they pay for school trips and dig into some of those more things about barriers. We're also about to do a Workforce for the Future project at Brodick on Arran, and again that is more looking at careers and really connecting pupils locally on Arran with somewhere that could hopefully become their future employer, but also they could perhaps come back to. And again, that's targeting pupils who might not ordinarily visit us, and that's supported by Museums Galleries Scotland. We're also going to try a new approach to schools engagement, time sliders, which brings together live theatre, digital and interactive visits. You might have seen the research by Ofcom, which came out last week, which said that 50% of 9-year-olds now have a smartphone. So digital is a massive area of development for us in the future, and we need to think about where to go with that. So just to finish up, I'm always really keen to share anything we know across the sector and really keen to hear from anybody else about work they're doing. So we'd love to hear from you to discuss any of this further, and also really happy to share any of the work we're doing. As I said, we have wonderful property colleagues right across the country, so we will have somewhere, wherever you are, near you that we can connect you up with. So please do get in touch, and we'd love to work with you more on this hugely important audience. Thank you so much.